Welcome back to MVM. Today we're going to do a half first impression, half review of a brand new game from Plaid Hat Games. It is called Abomination, the Heir of Frankenstein, and was #1 on my most anticipated list at Origins 2019. We've played it a couple times. I've played the demo of it, and then we played a full version of it just the other day. You played it one time.
Yep.
And we're going to give you kind of an overarching look at what the game is doing and give you our first impressions, give you the goods and the bads that we found with our first playthrough.
Yeah, like Jeremy said, this isn't a full-blown review, but we play a lot of games, so we think we have a pretty good handle on what we can tell you, at least explain about the game to see whether it's something you think you'll like.
All right, so the theme behind it is that Dr. Frankenstein has died, the monster is still roaming around. All the while, though, you still have Captain Robert Walton, who is the sea captain, chasing down the monster, trying to destroy him. So we are all representing one of these mad scientists that have a special ability that we're going to be able to use through the course of the game, trying to rebuild in our lab one of the different monsters. Your lab is going to consist of this board. It's a giant board, and on the board you're going to have 3 dials across the bottom. These dials are going to fluctuate and move, providing you special abilities of the game. And then over here you have an operating table that's going to allow you to build all the 6 different body pieces of the monster itself.
Yeah, I can't hold all the body parts up at once, but here you get an idea. Here's the torso of one of the bodies you're going to be collecting. You're going to be building the body over here. You're also going to be collecting things to build those body parts in this area right here. You're going to be going out to the cemetery, to the morgue, to the hospital, even to the back alley to murder people, to take these things so that you can build these body parts, then potentially skin them, and then finally shock them into life.
Yeah, and if we didn't mention, this is a super macabre game, one that we already knew was going to be pretty dark. When you look at these cards, there are dead people everywhere, and they're not just dead. You have people with gunshot wounds to the head, you have blood running out into the alley, you have people with their jaws simply broken off and blood everywhere. So going into that, know that this is not a game you're probably going to want to play with super young kids.
Probably not.
And people that are even mildly grossed out by adult content. I like that too. I love the fact that they went just full out with it and they said, hey, we're going to make a really dark themed game, and we're going to make it so dark that it fits the actual gameplay itself.
Yeah, and like we said, it is dark, and there is some blood. It's not over-the-top ridiculous, gory, or anything like that, but macabre is probably the best word that we can come up with to describe this game. And the great thing about it is, this is a Euro worker placement game that has more theme in it than any 10 other worker placement games I think I've played.
Yeah.
The theme really comes through. When you go to these locations, it really feels like you're doing the thing at that location.
Before we talk about the board, there's also a sideboard called the event board. On the event board, you're going to have a marker for the sea captain himself, and this is kind of the timer in the game. If he ever reaches the last 13th spot in the game, and he's going to move every single round, that's going to trigger the end of the game. And there are events and encounters that are also going to move that faster than once per round. Here is where you're going to put your stack of cards. These cards are going to consist of 2 different types of cards. You have your event cards and you have your encounter cards. And an X number of those are going to be mixed together out of a giant stack of cards. Each of these 2 types of cards are double-sided. And when they're drawn at the start of every single one of the rounds, they're going to either give you an encounter or an event that's going to occur for everyone. What's really cool about this is that the encounters are double-sided, as I already mentioned, and they're going to trigger one of the sides depending upon what round you're on, but also it's going to trigger a story element out of the book itself.
Yeah, there's a lot of context-sensitive things going on with this event and encounter deck, but a lot of them are going to point you in the direction of the rule book that has all of these different things, and a lot of these add not only a lot of flavor, but a lot of decisions. For instance, someone might flip over an encounter card or an event card, and if you're the first player, you're typically the person who's going to be able to be in control of that. You get to choose someone in many cases at the table to be the target of the encounter or the event. Potentially everybody.
Yeah.
Some of these are ongoing effects, but oftentimes people are going to be presented with some sort of dilemma that they have to decide, okay, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. And sometimes it can shake out well, and sometimes it can't.
These events also have possibly 2 other things they could do in addition to the event themselves. There are events that have an execution in the public square. This is going to introduce new cards to the board. These are fresh bodies. The fresher the bodies, the more resources you're going to gather from them. And there's also events that create lightning storms that allow you to charge what they call Leyden jars. These are what you're going to be using to shock your monster to make them alive. All right, so we've talked about the event board. We've talked about the player board a little bit. Let's talk about the actual board itself. As David already said, this is a worker placement through and through, you have two different types of workers. You have your scientists, and then you have your assistants. Each of these different worker spots, which are denoted by these white with brown borders around them, require either one or two of the different types of workers. So if I go to this location, it can be either the scientist or the assistant themselves. When you go to these locations, some of them have costs associated with them. You may have to pay some coin. You may have to have a certain one of your dials at a certain area in order to activate those particular areas. Most of the sites are going to allow you to rummage through those decks to get cadavers. And again, these cadavers are going to allow you to gain the resources that you need on your player board in order to build those monsters. However, most of the cards also have a humanity cost. You can't just go out into the city and just take things from the hospital. Doing so is going to fluctuate those dials.
Yeah, these dials are core to the game for sure. You've got humanity, reputation, and expertise. Your humanity, like Jeremy just said, is going to be something that you want to manage so that it doesn't decrease. The higher you take it, the more points you're going to get. The lower it goes, you might lose some points. Your reputation is going to be something that you use out on the board in certain locations. You're going to gain some out on the board, but you're also going to go to certain places and you need a certain amount of reputation to achieve things. And then finally, your expertise is what you need, first and foremost, to be able to build your monster, because the different body parts require different levels of expertise. And like we said, some of those cadaver cards, it's not as simple as just taking the cards and taking the body parts from them. Some of them you might want to say, oh, I'm going to use this to actually just increase my expertise. And the cards will show that from time to time.
There's two other types of locations. You have your area over here. This is the place to gain humanity cards. When you gain humanity cards, they stay on your side of the board until you wish to use them. Usually these are context sensitive to going to a very particular area on the board. You may have to go to the cemetery, not take the cemetery action, but move your humanity up instead. They all have text on here that explain those. And the other location on this side of the board is the research area. These are also going to be consisting of different types of cards that work similarly to the ones from humanity. However, they have an option at the bottom to be discarded instead to mitigate some of the dice. There's other places on the board that don't provide cadavers. There's places down here where you can hire some henchmen or scoundrels in order to do particular things. And the one thing you need to know is that you can also bump other players' workers. Each of these can only have one worker on them. However, there are two places in a 3-player game where you can bump, meaning if I go to this location and there's already one of David's workers there, I can move that worker of David's here and pay him a coin. But only 2 people can be bumped for the entire round.
Yeah, and those bump spaces will fill up very quickly. So once they do, you are limited to the spaces on the board. So you want to make sure and really time and decide how you're going to use your workers, particularly between your assistants and your scientists, because there's some spaces that require just a scientist. And those are oftentimes the stronger locations or locations that allow you to do a little bit more. So you're definitely going to want to take that into consideration. One other spot that I wanted to mention, it doesn't provide a cadaver card, but it's one of my favorite spots, is the back alley.
Oh yeah.
This is where you go to murder someone. We'd mentioned earlier the different body parts are going to give you, or the different cadavers are going to give you different types of things. When you go murder someone, it's the freshest of bodies. Yeah. So you're going to get a lot of things there. But the downside is you're going to lose a lot of humanity for doing that. You're also going to bring the cops on your tail.
There's also some other spots. There's a first player spot. When you go there, you can claim first player for the next round. Also allows you to move that worker at the end of the round to an unoccupied space. And then you even have 4 spots on your player board that you can go to that will help you regain some types of resources, some blood, and even charge those Leyden jars when you need to revive your monster. All right, so the game is broken into 4 different steps. The very first step of the game is the event phase. That's when the first player is going to draw an event, and they're going to either do the event or the encounter, and you're going to follow that through until the next phase, which is the city phase. And this is when you're actually placing your workers out onto the board.
Yeah, and just like any worker placement game, you're going to go one after the other until everyone has placed all of their workers in these locations. Again, remembering that you can bump people until this space down here is filled. And you're going to be collecting resources as you do this, taking cadaver cards from different locations. Like we said, most of the locations are all about getting body parts, but some of the other locations that you want to go to, maybe you're a scientist, you want to go give a lecture, and you can get some reputation that way. All of these things are things you're going to want to consider.
After everyone is done placing all their workers, then going to do a simultaneous phase. This is called the lab phase. This is where everyone has the opportunity to build monster parts into their lab. You can build as many as you wish as long as you have the parts and the expertise in order to do so. And that's all tracked on this card here. the first side or the front side of the card is going to show you how to originally introduce that tile into your lab. The back side is once that tile is introduced to your lab. For instance, if you have a torso on your medical table, you can then complete the monster by flipping it over to the skin side. Each of these require a very specific number of resources. Again, these resources, we haven't mentioned what they are, but they're things like muscle and organ and blood, bone. You can even use animal parts. And all of these are going to give you victory points depending upon the grade of those materials. So you could have really degraded organs and get less victory points than if you had high grade.
And that's probably one of the more macabre aspects of the game. When you collect all of those different resources, depending on the cadaver you collect them from, they're going to go in one of these locations here. Then, throughout the game, these are going to decompose and degrade, as Jeremy said. So you want to use one parts if possible, because that's going to score you the most points. You can even get ice somewhere in the game so that they won't degrade over time. Again, this is a game dealing in body parts, blood, and bone. It's probably the most outrageous and macabre game I've ever played.
Yeah. Then once you're done building a monster, everyone has the opportunity to throw the switch. This is when you are going to use dice. You're going to roll dice in the game. For each Leyden jar that's charged that you wish to use, you're trying to bring those skinned body parts to life, because it's one of the triggers to win the game. And to do so, you're going to roll 2 dice for every Leyden jar you have. These dice have things like losing humanity, even bringing the monster to life, or damaging body parts. And there's ways, obviously, to heal them through the course of the game. Once everyone is done doing that, you can actually preserve some of those to sell them back to the city, if you so wish, to get some money in the future. And then once everyone's done with that, you go to the final phase, and this is simply the reset phase. This is where those organs are going to decompose. You're going to refresh the game board with new cards. You're going to return all the meeples back to the players, and you're going to advance that captain 1 step or multiple steps depending upon the event card that was out. And you're going to do that round after round until one of 2 things happens. If the captain has reached the final 13th space, that's going to trigger the end of the game. Or if one of the players has built all 6 body parts, completed them to their backside, and revived them. And when that happens, you're simply going to tally up all the different victory points that people have collected through the game. You also have some bonus objectives at the bottom for, it's kind of a race aspect. Since some of those may be like have all 6 body parts on your table, whoever has the most franks at the end, and so forth. So we kind of walked you through Abomination. First impressions, obviously, I was drawn to the theme, and I know that's probably a bad thing, but, you know, video games have all kinds of awful things in them. You know, headshots all over the place. There's not a lot of board games that are super, super dark, and I love that.
Yeah, well, not aside from how dark it is, I like the fact that we've got a Euro here, and this is a pretty good medium plus weight Euro for sure, with all the moving parts, that has a ton of theme.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of Euros obviously have themes attached to them. This one, I really genuinely feel the locations, when you're going to the cemetery and you're digging up bodies, you'll find a few things. First of all, the bodies don't have any blood at the cemetery.
Right.
Makes sense.
Right.
However, if you go to a murder scene and murder someone, you're going to get blood, less bone, that sort of thing. And the same thing goes with the morgue and the hospital. Depending on where you get these cadavers, dictates where you put those resources on this chart from 1 to 4.
Not to mention the fact that blood will actually leave your player board after it leaves the 2nd spot. So the blood dries up and is no longer usable. So you have to go out there and find fresh bodies. And in doing so, again, it's going to fluctuate that dial up and down. You're going to lose humanity for the more fresh bodies that you get. So it's super thematic. Keeping along with that thematic line too, you also have that manual that has all these different events that are going to trigger and bring in story elements to the game. And it's really cool because you want to be first player because obviously you want to go first, you want to be able to lock up locations, but also a lot of these encounters are going to be triggered by the first player looking at a player and saying, okay, well, this one's going to affect you or this one's going to affect you. So you have some control over that to control the story elements too. And there's not very many Euro games outside maybe some Red Raven games from Ryan that have a story element built into them, and I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It, in a weird way, reminded me of Red Raven games for sure. But those things that happen in those story and those event cards really can have some impact. Some of them might move the captain 2 or 3 spaces in one event, so it could really accelerate the game. It reminded me a little bit, in a weird way, of some of the ongoing endgame triggers that come out in Vindication, where the events are really meaningful, not to mention the fact that the event cards are double-sided so that you pull an event card, and if you're in rounds 1 through 5, you do this side. If it's rounds 1, the other rounds, you look at the other side. So at first I thought, oh, the event cards are going to get tired and boring, but there's a lot of them, and the way that they variably work is hard to explain.
We'll jump in right to the negative thing that we found with the game. We played 4-player, and it lasted 3 hours.
At least.
It was a very, very long game, and the box says 60 to 120 minutes. I'm not sure that's possible. Maybe it is with 4 very experienced gamers.
Not 60.
But once you start, there are places to get additional workers or to upgrade your scientists or your assistants to scientists. So you're going to have 4 workers. Each player is going to be placing one of these workers on the table and doing an action with them. A lot of these actions are going to allow you to dig through cards. And when you're digging through 3 cards and then doing the actions of all 3 of those cadavers, that takes some time. So when you're playing 13 rounds of 4 actions each, it becomes a longer experience, especially when you get into the narrative aspects of it.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that as worker placement games go, particularly in the long game and well into each round, it gets really tight out on the board. So, and you have to remember, there's only certain spaces that use scientists and certain spaces that use the assistants.
Right.
So if you've used your scientists and you have 2 assistants left, and you wanted to go to a lot of these scientist spaces, which are the ones that are still open, and maybe these bump spaces are already filled, you're going to find yourself using maybe at times your last assistant to do something that you didn't necessarily really want to do, but it's something you basically did at the end of the round to finish it up.
Do you have any other negative things?
No, I would say the length of the game, and again, this is a first impression, so with more experience it would get shorter, but I would estimate that 60 to 120 should be more like 90 to 180.
Yeah.
It would be my guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is Abomination, the Heir of Frankenstein. We both really, really enjoyed this game. Super surprised by how dark it is. I love the fact that they went with it and they just ran with it.
I think there's something wrong with us for liking it
I don't
so
care.
much.
So if you have any questions, make them in the comments below. This was just a first impression. Hopefully we'll come back and revisit this on a chit chat episode in the future. And we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.